This is my final project for SBU Brain-Based Learning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the different elements we've learned in class and how I use them in PE and in health. Alright, so initially the book started talking about changes in students' learning. Before, there was a lot of sage on the stage kind of teaching, one expert, many people listening to that expert, maybe taking notes. With the change in the way kids just interact with things on a daily basis, there's a lot more technology, which means it has led to a shorter attention span, and the model of talking and taking notes is kind of diminished in its strength. So the question is, what are some other ways to utilize and leverage brain-based learning? Well, the way I try to approach this in the way that I think supports brain-based learning the best in a lot of different ways is by taking a teacher as facilitator approach. In other words, my job is to set up the class beforehand, get the best sources, set up the best learning activities, and then kind of set things in motion, and then move and facilitate and help students take steps forward as they engage the material directly, whether that be through short bits of information, through clips or images or something like that, or short readings or articles or something like that. But then they will discuss it and create a product from it, as opposed to just here's this point and this point and this point, write it down and be able to remember it for the test. Okay, so one of the things the book talked about was novelty. It also points out that it's the point of novelty, which is basically adding elements into the lesson that create challenges to the brain, which helps it to be more engaged. Novelty is not just kind of the teacher up there telling jokes, kind of staying with the sage on the stage kind of concept. Novelty is doing things like checking for understanding right away. One of the ways I do that is a lot of times I'll make YouTube videos like this on the content we're going to learn about, have the students watch it and pause it, and then I have them take a quiz, actually, and more so answer a question as they're watching the video. And I use Moodle, which is a learning management system, which then gives me feedback on what they're understanding and what they're not understanding right away. Very effective tool. But this way, by doing this, it introduces novelty. It's asking the brain to change what it's doing consistently. And in the videos, I try to introduce that as well with the pictures I use, similar to what I'm doing in this video. Not a whole bunch of words, because if you put a bunch of words on there, they're reading and not listening, or listening and not reading. So you don't want to confuse the brain that way. You just give them an image to hook into, and then you talk over it and address it. So this talks about how to move things from the short-term to the long-term memory. I really like the example he used where when a student, for example, doesn't understand math, something they're learning in math, a lot of times what will happen is the school or the teacher will have them do remedial work, or they'll talk slower or something like that. And he equated this to just trying to shine more light through Venetian blinds. It doesn't really get through, even though it seems like it's getting brighter. It's not really, no connections are being made. Rather, he said to use a lot of different skills, a lot of different ways to move things from the short-term to the long-term memory. One of them being mnemonic devices. Here's a real simple one, Roy G. Biv, to remember the colors on the color spectrum. There's a lot of other ways that you can do this. You can use humor, kind of connect a concept to a humorous joke or a pun or something like that, and in doing so, you move the content from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. In PE, I try to do this a lot when we're in health. I try to do this a lot when we're learning different ways in which we lift. Of course, when you're doing something physical, there's the advantage of moving things to the long-term memory because it connects it to something that's physical in their bodies. In other words, muscle memory. So I have a lot of advantages with PE being able to do this, just using kinesthetic learning to help move items from short-term to long-term memory. Another thing you talked about was self-concept and safety. Self-concept, this is really important in PE. One of the big reasons why kids don't enjoy PE is because they might be out of shape in some way. They might have had a negative experience on a playground when they were trying to get into a basketball game. They might be the last kid picked, kind of thing. And when you talked about self concept, how is your brain viewing itself? How are you viewing yourself? Are you somebody who's good at math? Are you somebody who's not good at math? Same concepts apply in PE. Are you the kid who can make 10 free throws in a row? Are you the kid that can hardly get the ball to the hoop? What I try to do with this in order to increase self-concept and help them understand the skills is to scale the activity. I might ask one kid to be the person who's kind of, for playing football, who might be the person who's playing the quarterback, and that person is the best athlete. But my goal in working with that kid and develop his self-concept into being a leader in that role is to make sure he's getting the ball to the kids who might have the lowest self-concept, the ones who are going to struggle the most catching it. But I can create an environment where that happens best. Another element is safety, and I remember reading about this and thinking, wow, it's really got to be challenging in schools, districts where there's high crime, high poverty, because if Sosa's discussion on the brain being able to learn new concepts and reproduce them effectively, if safety has an effect on that, and a person's constantly living in an environment where they're constantly looking to survive, that's going to make that quite challenging. Okay, primacy regency effect. Really, this impacted me quite a bit. And let's talk about this. This is the diagram that was in the book, and you can see time in minutes and versus degree of retention and the two different prime times and the downtime. This really struck me a lot. I'll spend a lot of time, whether it's in PE or in health, kind of having a conversation, doing attendance, talking about things that don't really matter, kind of the stuff they talked about in the book. And after reading this, I realized it's best just to really get right into the lesson with a good advanced organizer and start making use of that prime time one. Downtime might be the time when I do some talking about some things that maybe it's too many lessons or something like that. So it'll allow me that downtime to talk about some things I need to, maybe do the attendance at that point. Maybe they're doing something else, or I've introduced novelty where they're, instead of listening to me specifically, they're doing things more along the line of talking to each other, where they're processing the information and utilizing that downtime still in the classroom very well. So the primacy regency effect really affects everything I do, mainly in how I structure lessons. Transfer and similar skills. This is a big one in PE. Sosa warned against teaching similar skills at the same time because it can negatively affect transfer. In this case, it's really obvious. You can see there's a pitching motion and a passing motion. So I want to make sure when I teach these skills that I can kind of piggyback off one of them if they, for example, know how to pass. But I wouldn't want to teach these at the same time because it may affect arm motion. You can see there how they're similar, but they're not the same. It might affect the footwork. Again, they're similar, but they're not the same. So I want to make sure I separate things and transfer in similar skills as to when I teach them. When speaking about right and left brain learners and understanding differentiation, the goal here is to assist right and left brain learners in learning concepts. It would be a mistake to only address one side. Maybe everything's very logical, very methodical in class, and on the other hand, everything could be very abstract and little bits and pieces of everything everywhere. As a teacher, I try to make sure that I think the big way to address this is through differentiation, allowing students to have both that logical and that abstract learning activity in class when you're working through a concept. I try to do this in health when I'm introducing a concept. It's more difficult to do in PE because it is kind of more straightforward, but it certainly helps out a lot in health in the way that I approach things. Really great discussion the book had on difficulty versus complexity. I know I'm probably been guilty of increasing difficulty when thinking I'm adding complexity. This really helped to clarify these two concepts for me. And I always try to work off Bloom's taxonomy when lesson planning and when creating activities for students. So I just basically, it's pretty straightforward in this case. I have grown to make sure that I am actually introducing complexity and not just increasing difficulty. We're not gonna do 10 more terms to memorize. Rather, we're going to have you create something with the 5 that you've already learned and move you into a different part of Bloom's. In conclusion, this has been a great perspective on looking at the brain and how things occur neurologically in a learner. Definitely taking a lot of things away from this that I can apply in my class. And again, the biggest things I'm taking away is difficulty versus complexity, novelty, prime time, all these different types of things.